The air smelled like smoke and metal. The alien auction block stood tall in the center of the city. Bright lights shone down. Crowds of rich aliens laughed, pointing and shouting bids. This was not a market for things. This was a market for people. And on the cold metal platform stood a little human girl. Her name was Lena. She was just 6 years old. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her hands were shaking. A heavy chain was around her tiny neck. She wore a thin, torn dress. Her feet were bare. She had not eaten for days. "Start the bid at 50 crystals," the alien auctioneer shouted. "A rare human child. Small, but healthy. Can be trained." Aliens murmured with interest. One large creature with red skin said, "I will teach her to sing." Another with sharp teeth said, "No, I want her for my pets to play with." The crowd laughed. Lena began to cry. Her small voice was lost in the noise. She looked around, hoping to see a familiar face, but there was no one. Her father was gone. He had been taken away days ago. She didn't know if he was alive. The auctioneer banged a metal rod. Going once, going twice. Then everything stopped. A voice came from the back of the crowd. "She's not for sale." Silence. All heads turned. A man was standing there. His clothes were torn, dusty. His face was dirty. His hair was long and wild. But his eyes, they were sharp, strong, burning with fire. It was Jaron, Lena's father. Lena gasped, "Papa." Jaron took a step forward. The aliens made way, confused. He walked with a limp. His hands were scared, but he did not stop. "I said," he repeated, louder now, "she's not for sale. She is my daughter." The auctioneer sneered. "Do you have 100 crystals, human?" "I have something better," Jaron said. He knelt down, looking at Lena. Her tears turned into hope. She reached for him. "I will take her place," he said. The crowd burst into laughter. You? You are worth nothing," one alien shouted. But a deep, royal voice cut through the noise. "Let him speak." Everyone turned. At the top of the auction building stood a tall, shining figure, dressed in flowing robes, wearing a golden crown. Her skin was silver blue. Her eyes glowed like fire. It was the Empress. She stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but powerful. "You offer yourself for a child. You know what happens to slaves like you." "I know," Jaron said. He stood tall. "But I also know one thing. I made a promise. I told my daughter I would come for her. I'm here." The Empress smiled slowly. "Very well," she said. "Release the child. Take him." Lena screamed, "No, Papa." Guards pulled her back. One large alien grabbed Jaron and pushed him to his knees. The Empress looked down at Jaron. "You have courage. Stupid, but rare. I like that." Jaron looked up at her with hate. "Just let her go." "Oh, she will be safe," the Empress said. "As long as you do exactly what I say." "What do you want from me?" The Empress smiled coldly. "I want to see how much pain a human can take before he breaks." She turned to her guards. "Put him in the arena. Tomorrow he fights." Lena cried out, trying to run to her father. A guard blocked her. Jaron shouted, "Stay strong, Lena. I love you. Don't be afraid." And then he was dragged away into the darkness, enslaved by the Empress herself. The cold chains around Jaron's wrists cut into his skin. Two large alien guards dragged him through a long, dark hallway beneath the Empress's palace. The walls were made of black stone that hummed with strange energy. Red lights blinked from the ceilings. The air smelled like oil, blood, and old metal. Jaron had been in prisons before. As a soldier, he had seen war zones, torture rooms, and death. But this place felt different. This place felt alive, like the walls were watching him. The guards threw him into a small metal cell. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. He landed hard on the ground, coughing. His body ached. His knees were bleeding. His back was sore from the electric whips they used when he resisted. But Jaren didn't cry out. He just stared ahead. He could still hear her voice. "I want to see how much pain a human can take before he breaks." The Empress's words echoed in his mind. He lay still for hours, maybe more. Time moved strangely in the dungeon. Then the door opened again. A tall alien in armor stepped in. He had no face, just a smooth metal mask and glowing blue eyes. "I am Commander Zarn," the figure said in a deep voice. "You fight tomorrow. If you live, you fight again. If you win 5 times, maybe you live another day. If you lose once," he dragged his finger across his throat. Jaren stayed silent. Zarn stepped closer. "She watches all the fights. The Empress. She enjoys pain. Yours will be her favorite." Jaren slowly stood up. "Where is my daughter?" Zarn tilted his head. "Safe, for now. But if you want to keep her that way, you better bleed well for your Empress." The commander dropped a bundle of rags on the ground. "Wear this tomorrow. It is all you get." Then he left. That night, Jaren couldn't sleep. Not because of the hard floor, not because of the fear, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lena, crying, reaching for him. He had to survive. Not for himself. For her. The next morning, the cell door opened again. This time, 4 guards grabbed him. They dragged him through another tunnel, longer than before. As they walked, the sound of thousands of voices grew louder. Cheering, screaming, laughing. Jaren stepped into the light and saw it. The arena. It was huge, a circle of stone and steel, surrounded by towers full of screaming aliens. They threw food, bombs, even coins at the fighters below. Some laughed. Others roared. Above it all, sitting on a golden balcony, was the Empress. She wore a long dark robe. Her crown was sharp like blades. Her glowing red eyes locked onto Jaren the moment he entered. Then Jaren looked up, and his heart nearly stopped. In a glass cage hanging above the arena was Lena. She sat curled in a corner, clutching her knees, crying softly. Her face was pale. "Lena!" he shouted. She looked up. Her tiny hand touched the glass. A guard hit Jaren in the back, forcing him to move. The Empress stood and raised her hand. The crowd silenced. "Today," she announced, "a human slave will prove his worth. He will bleed for his daughter's safety. Let us see how far a father's love goes." She smiled coldly. "Release the beast." A loud metal gate opened across the arena. Something crawled out, huge, heavy, and hungry. It was a razorback, a creature with 10 legs, 2 mouths, and blades growing from its back. Its eyes were black and dead. It sniffed the air and locked onto Jaren. Jaren picked up the only weapon thrown at him, a dull, cracked spear. He had no armor, no shield, nothing but his hands and will. The crowd cheered. Lena screamed from the cage. "Papa!" "No." The fight began. The razorback charged fast. Too fast. Jaren rolled away just in time. The beast hit the wall, sending dust flying. He stabbed at it, but the spear barely scratched its thick skin. It roared and swung its tail. It hit Jaren hard in the chest. He flew back, landed hard, gasping for air. Blood filled his mouth. But he got up. Again. And again. He dodged. He ducked. He struck. Finally, he saw it, a weak spot under its belly. Jaren tricked it into leaping. As it came down, he rolled beneath it and stabbed hard into the soft skin. The razorback screamed and thrashed. Jaren was thrown off, but the wound was deep. The creature slowed, bled heavily, and finally fell. Dead. The arena went silent. Then, loud cheers. The Empress stood. Her face was unreadable. "Interesting," she said. Guards dragged Jaron back, half dead, but alive. He passed Lena's cage. She reached out. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm here." Her fingers touched the glass again. "I'm proud of you, Papa." Back in his cell, Jaron collapsed. But he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling. The Empress wanted him broken, but he was not going to break. He would fight. Every day. Every time. Until he could find a way out. Until he could bring her down. For Lena. For every human slave. Whispers in the cell. The cell was cold again. Jaron lay flat on the stone floor, his body shaking. His skin was cut, bruised, and burned. His breathing was slow, painful. The dull spear he had used to kill the Razorback had been taken away. He had nothing now, nothing but blood, sweat, and a promise in his heart. "Stay alive for her," he whispered to himself. For Lena. She had seen the fight. She had watched from the glass cage, helpless. But her voice, her tiny fingers on the glass, her words, "I'm proud of you, Papa," they kept ringing in his ears. He closed his eyes. For a moment, it was quiet. Then, someone coughed. Jaron's eyes opened. He wasn't alone anymore. Across the cell, in the shadows, sat another prisoner. The man was old. His skin was grayish-brown. He had alien markings on his face, and his eyes were dull like dying stars. But they still had a spark of wisdom. The old prisoner smiled with broken teeth. "You fight like a wild dog," he said, "but you live like a warrior." Jaron stared at him. "Who are you?" The old man tilted his head. "Name's Breck. Been down here for, who knows how long. Long enough to hear every scream in this place." He limped closer, dragging a metal chain attached to his ankle. "I saw your fight. Impressive. But you won't survive 5 battles like that." Jaron sat up slowly, wincing. "I don't need 5. I just need to live long enough to get my daughter out of here." Breck raised an eyebrow. "A child. Human." Jaron nodded. "She's all I have." The old man grew serious. He lowered his voice and looked around, even though there were no guards. "You should have never made a deal with her." "You mean the Empress?" Jaron growled. "I had no choice." Breck looked at the cell bars. "We all had no choice. Once. But listen carefully, human. That woman, she is not what she seems. She is more than just a ruler. She is a monster. She feeds on fear. And there's something else. Something dark she's hiding." Jaron leaned closer. "What do you know?" Breck hesitated, then whispered, "There is a prophecy. Very old. Older than this empire. It speaks of a fire that comes from the stars. A fire that cannot be controlled. It says, one will rise from the dust of earth, burn through the chains, and end the rule of silver and flame." He looked Jaron in the eye. "Many believe it talks about a human who will destroy the Empress." Jaron frowned. "That's just a story." "Maybe," Breck said with a shrug. "But the Empress believes it. That's why she kills every human who shows strength. She fears it." Silence fell between them. Then Breck added, "But you survived the Razorback. You were willing to trade your life for your child. That is power she can't understand. And that makes you dangerous." Jaron sat back against the wall, deep in thought. Could it be true? Could there really be a prophecy? Could he be the one it spoke of? He shook his head. "I'm no hero. I'm just a father." Breck smiled again. "Sometimes a father is the greatest hero of all." Later that night, as the dungeon lights flickered, a soft beeping noise echoed down the hall. Breck turned his head. "They're coming again." Footsteps, voices, guards. But they weren't coming for Jaron this time. They were bringing someone else. Another human. A woman, maybe 20 years old, covered in bruises, her arms bound in chains. She looked weak, but her eyes were full of fire. The guards shoved her into the cell next to Jaron's, and walked away, laughing. Jaran crawled to the bars. "Are you okay?" She looked at him for a long second. "You're the guy from the arena, aren't you?" He nodded. She leaned closer and whispered, "I know how to escape." Jaran's heart skipped a beat. Breck looked up, surprised too. The girl looked over her shoulder. "They caught me because I tried to steal the Empress's master code crystal, but I copied the pattern." Jaran stared at her. "You have the code." "Not the code," she said. "The sequence. It's hidden in my memory. The Empress doesn't know yet." Jaran suddenly saw a new path. Escape, not just survival. "Who are you?" he asked. The girl whispered, "Ray. I was born in a mining colony. My family died under her rule. I've been fighting ever since." Jaran looked at Breck. "You hear that?" Breck smiled wide. Maybe this really is the beginning." Jaran reached through the bars toward Ray. "If we work together, we get out. But I need one promise." "What?" she asked. "When we leave, we take my daughter." Ray nodded without hesitation. "Deal." From her throne, miles above, the Empress stared at her glowing screen. She watched the three prisoners. Her eyes narrowed. She smiled. "They think I don't know," she whispered. "Let the fire rise. I will enjoy crushing it." The test of fire. The next morning came with silence. No screams, no metal sounds, just a thick, heavy silence in the dungeon. Jaran sat on the cold floor of his cell, eyes closed, muscles sore, breathing slow. He was preparing himself. He had spoken to Ray deep into the night. She had drawn shapes in the dirt with her finger, showing him the palace layout, the slave routes, and the location of the Empress's master control room. It was their only way out. If they could reach it, they could shut down the slave system, the arena controls, even the Empress's personal guards. But first, they had to survive. A loud buzzer echoed through the dungeon halls. The door to Jaran's cell opened with a heavy creak. Guards entered. Two of them held shock spears. One wore a red badge, a sign he served directly under the Empress. "You've been chosen for the test," the red-badged guard said. Jaran stood. "What test?" No answer. Chains were clamped onto his wrists. He was pulled forward, dragged through endless corridors again. But this time, they didn't take him to the arena. They took him underground, deeper than he had ever been. The hallway became narrower, darker. Strange writing appeared on the walls, ancient alien symbols glowing faintly. The air was hot, heavy. It felt like he was walking into the heart of a volcano. Finally, they reached a massive steel door. The guard pressed his palm against a scanner. The door opened with a loud hiss. Inside was a maze. Not just any maze, a shifting, burning maze. Fire lit the walls. The floors moved beneath metal panels. Sharp spinning blades, rising spears, and pits filled with boiling liquid appeared and disappeared without warning. Above it all, a cold, familiar voice echoed from hidden speakers. "The Empress." "Welcome, human," she said. "This is my personal maze. I call it the test of fire. No one has survived it. Not even my elite fighters. If you make it to the end, I'll give your daughter medicine. She is not well." Jaran's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "She's weak. She misses you," the Empress purred. "But maybe she doesn't have to suffer if you impress me today." The speakers went silent. The door behind Jaran closed, locked. The floor shifted under his feet. The test had begun. He ran forward. The first room was filled with flying blades, spinning from the walls like angry insects. He ducked, rolled, and jumped, narrowly escaping death each time. A blade sliced his arm. Blood poured out. He ripped a piece of cloth from his shirt and tied it. "Not today," he muttered. "Not yet." He moved to the next chamber. It was filled with fire, walls of flame that came and went in strange patterns. He watched carefully, counted the seconds. moved when it was safe. He reached halfway through, but then, the floor under him dropped. He landed hard in a tunnel with metal spikes coming from both sides. No time to think. He crawled, bled, and screamed, but never stopped. At the end of the tunnel, he kicked open a weak panel and stumbled into the final chamber. This room was quiet. No fire, no blades, just a single pedestal in the center. On it, something glowed. A crystal. Soft golden light pulsed from it like a heartbeat. Jaren stepped closer, unsure. The air felt strange, warmer, almost comforting. The crystal whispered, not in words, but in feeling. It pulsed with life, and somehow, Jaren understood. You are not weak. You are more than you know. His hand reached for it. As soon as his fingers touched the crystal, everything changed. A flash of light exploded around him. Memories hit him like thunder. Not memories from his life, but from something older, something buried in human blood, something connected to Earth itself. He saw fire. He saw space. He saw Earth's sun shining like a golden god. And then, silence. Jaren fell back, gasping. His body felt different. He looked at his hands. They were glowing faintly. His wounds were closing, slowly but surely. His pain faded. Inside him, something had awakened. A spark. A fire. The prophecy. Could it be real? The wall in front of him opened. Guards stood outside, weapons drawn. But Jaren didn't wait. He ran forward and moved faster than ever before. He disarmed one guard with a smooth motion, knocked down another with a single strike. Something inside him guided his movements. He didn't understand it, but he trusted it. The other guards backed off, stunned. He didn't kill them. He didn't need to. Back in the Empress's throne room, she watched through a holographic screen. She leaned forward. Her smile was gone. Interesting, she whispered. The fire. It's starting. Jaren was thrown back into his cell. Breck and Ray stared at him. Are you okay? Ray asked. Jaren stood still, breathing hard. I touched something in the maze. I saw things. I felt stronger. Breck stepped closer, shocked. You touched the heart crystal. And you're still alive. Jaren nodded slowly. Breck whispered, then it's true. You really are the flame of Terra. Jaren didn't care about legends. He only cared about Lena. She's getting sick, he said. I have to get to her. We escape soon. Ray stepped forward. We escape tomorrow. I memorized the code pattern for the gate. We'll need to move fast. Jaren looked at both of them. His eyes no longer looked tired. They burned like fire. Then let's light this empire on fire. The rise of the flame. The arena was louder than ever. Drums pounded. Alien horns howled. Fires burned along the walls. Thousands of aliens filled the seats, waiting for the next battle. Many were whispering one name. Not the Razorback. Not the Empress. They whispered, the Flame. That's what they called Jaren now. After what he survived. After touching the heart crystal. After walking out of the test of fire. Still breathing. And something inside him had truly changed. He stood in the shadows beneath the arena, breathing slowly, feeling the heat rising through his body again. His fingers tingled. His wounds had closed. His eyes glowed faintly now, like burning coals. Ray stood beside him, also dressed in rough armor. Today was the day they would begin their move. Not to escape yet, but to show the entire empire that humans do not break. We draw attention, she whispered. The Empress is watching closely now. Jaren nodded. Let her watch. The gate opened. Sunlight poured into the tunnel. The guards shoved them forward. Jaren stepped into the light, no longer afraid. The crowd went wild. The flame. Some alien shouted. The Empress's favorite toy. Others mocked. She should burn him herself. One laughed. But Jaren didn't hear them. He looked up. Lena's glass cage was still above the arena. She looked pale, too pale. His heart squeezed. She needs medicine. She needs me. I won't fail her. From her golden balcony, the Empress stood. She raised a hand. 2 alien beasts were released into the arena. Massive with armored hides and venomous fangs, a new kind of death. Faster, smarter. Jaron and Ray didn't move. They waited. Then, Jaron closed his eyes and let the fire guide him. The battle began. The beasts rushed toward them. Ray rolled left, distracting one. The second one charged Jaron, jaws wide open. He didn't dodge. He stepped into the attack, and at the last second, grabbed the beast by its lower jaw and pushed upward, twisting with unnatural strength. Its head snapped sideways. The crowd gasped. Jaron moved like lightning, faster than any human should. He ducked under a tail swipe, rolled forward, and grabbed a spear from a fallen fighter. The weapon glowed the moment he touched it. The second beast lunged. Jaron didn't flinch. He leaped into the air and drove the spear deep into its eye. It screamed. Fell. The ground shook. Silence. Ray looked at him, stunned. You're not human anymore, are you? I'm still me, Jaron said, breathing hard. Just more. The Empress stood slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with something new. Fear. She waved her hand. A group of elite alien guards entered the arena. 10 of them, all armed. This wasn't part of the usual show. The crowd murmured. Ray frowned. This isn't a fight. This is an execution. Jaron smiled coldly. Not for us. The guards attacked. But this time, Jaron was ready. He fought with strength and speed far beyond any human. His movements were fluid, precise, powerful. Every blow knocked a guard to the ground. Every dodge made them look clumsy. Ray joined him, fighting smart, moving with him like they had trained for years. Together, they became a storm of fire and fury. The crowd no longer cheered. They watched in shock. The Empress's best soldiers were falling, one by one, until none stood. Jaron dropped his bloodied weapon and looked straight at the Empress. Then, he did something that shook the entire arena. He raised his fist in the air, not in anger, but in defiance. A signal, a challenge. In the prison cells below, slaves were watching through small screens. They saw the flame. They saw a human stand tall, fight back, and win. A whisper started. Maybe we can rise too. Back in the holding cells, Breck waited near the entrance. When the guards returned Jaron and Ray to their cells, Breck stared at Jaron with wide eyes. You faced the royal guards, he whispered, and lived. Jaron sat down, exhausted but alive. Barely. Ray dropped beside him. But they're scared now. You saw her face. Breck smiled. That fear is your weapon. Use it. Jaron looked up at the camera in the ceiling. She said Lena would get medicine if I survived the test. I did. She didn't give it. She won't, Breck said. She's playing a bigger game. Then I'll break her board, Jaron growled. Piece by piece. That night, Lena's cage was moved back to a dark tower in the palace. A small alien doctor checked her temperature. Her body is weak, he muttered. Too long without real food or care. The Empress watched through the glass wall. She will live, she said, but only if the flame keeps burning. She turned away and whispered to herself, he is not just a man. He is becoming a symbol, and symbols must be destroyed before they spread. But deep in the dungeons, a spark had become a flame. And that flame had begun to spread, quietly, slowly, unstoppably. Among the slaves, among the prisoners, even among alien servants who hated their chains. Hope was waking up. And it had a name now. Jaron, breaking the chains. Midnight fell like a whisper across the alien empire. But in the underground prison where the flame was held, It fell like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Jaren sat on the cold stone floor, staring at the tiny fire Breck had built using old cloth and scrap wires. The flame flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls. Ray sat across from him, tightening the straps on her stolen armor. Tonight was the night. The escape plan was ready. Ray had memorized the code sequence to the gate after years in the mines. Breck had stolen a small control chip from a guard's bell last week. Jaren had prepared his mind, heart, and body. He had faced monsters, guards, and fire, and survived. Now came the hardest part. Freedom. "You sure you want to do this?" Ray asked, voice low. Jaren didn't look away from the flame. "My daughter is still in that tower. She's sick. She's alone. I'll burn this whole empire if I have to. But I'm getting her back." Breck nodded. The tunnel under the arena leads straight into the palace's lower level. That's where her cage was moved. Once we get in, we split. You go for the girl. Ray and I go for the master control room. Ray smiled slightly. We shut the systems down. All cages open. All cells unlocked. Jaren clenched his fist. We break the chains. At exactly 2:00 in the dark cycle, the guard rotation changed. Jaren waited until he heard the footsteps fade. Then, quietly, Ray moved to the wall and pressed the chip into the lock. Breck entered the first code. The light blinked green. Click. The cell door opened. Jaren stepped out. Free. For the first time since he surrendered himself. They moved through the lower halls like ghosts. Ray led the way. She knew the hidden corridors, the forgotten paths only slaves and rats remembered. Jaren moved behind her, eyes sharp, ears tuned. Breck followed, slower but determined. The prison was quiet. Too quiet. They reached the old arena storage room. Dust filled the air. Crates of broken weapons and armor lay untouched. Ray opened a vent panel behind the crates. "This leads to the lower bridge," she whispered. "From there, we split." Jaren paused. He looked at both of them. "If I don't make it back, you save the others." Ray touched his shoulder. "You'll make it." Breck gave him a tired smile. "You have something we don't. You have something the Empress fears." "What's that?" "Something to lose." The vent was tight. Jaren crawled through it alone, heart racing, fire building in his chest again. At the end of the tunnel, he dropped into a shadowed hallway. Red lights blinked above him. Sirens were silent, but the air felt wrong. He moved quickly, ducking behind columns, dodging security drones. Finally, he saw it, a tall glass tower in the center of the palace garden. Lena's prison. The tower was surrounded by 3 guards. Jaren crouched behind a large statue of the Empress. He studied their movement. 2 patrolled in circles. The 3rd stood near the tower door, bored. Jaren picked up a small rock. He threw it far across the garden. It hit a wall with a sharp clang. All 3 guards turned. He moved. Fast, silent, deadly. Before they turned back, he was already behind them. Thud, thud, thud. 3 guards hit the ground. Unconscious. Jaren reached the tower door and entered the code Breck gave him. It opened. Inside, on a small bed, lay Lena. She looked so small now. Too small. Pale. Weak. But alive. Her eyes opened slowly. "Papa." He dropped to his knees beside her. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Tears ran down her cheeks. She reached for his hand. "You came." "I promised," he whispered. He picked her up gently. She was light as air. Then the alarm screamed. Red lights flashed across the garden. Drones swarmed from the sky. Jaren cursed under his breath and ran. He sprinted back toward the old tunnel, but it was already sealed. He turned the other way. Only one option left. The open arena gates. He ran straight into the arena. The entire crowd was there. The Empress stood high above. watching. Jaren stepped into the light with Lena in his arms. The crowd gasped. The Empress's voice echoed like a wave. "Seize him. Kill him if you must. But bring me the child." Jaren's eyes burned. He set Lena down behind a pillar. "Stay down. Don't move." She nodded, scared but brave. Guards poured into the arena. Jaren stepped forward, fists clenched. Then, it happened. The ground trembled. The arena gates burst open. And from the shadows, hundreds of prisoners flooded in. Breck, Ray, slaves, fighters, miners, all free, all carrying weapons, all following the flame. Ray shouted, "We shut down the security grids. The control room is ours." The slaves roared. The Empress's guards hesitated. Too many. Too fast. Too angry. Jaren picked up a fallen blade. Fire rose from his skin like steam. His eyes glowed bright. He pointed it at the royal balcony. "Your time is over," he growled. The Empress stared back, face still, eyes blazing. "This is not the end," she whispered. And she vanished into the shadows. The arena became a battlefield. But this time, the slaves were winning. Chains were broken. The people rose. And above it all, Lena watched her father, the man who gave up everything, become a symbol of hope, of fire, of freedom. A father's final stand. The sky above the arena turned dark. Smoke rose from burning towers. The screams of battle echoed across the alien city. Where once the Empress ruled with power and pride, now there was only fear and fire. The uprising had begun. The slaves were no longer quiet. They were no longer weak. They were fighting for freedom, for family, and for the flame. In the center of the arena, Jaren stood with blood on his hands and fire in his eyes. He held Lena in his arms, shielding her from falling debris. Around them, Ray and Breck led hundreds of prisoners through the royal gates. Guards were fleeing. Drones were crashing. The Empire was cracking. But Jaren knew this wasn't over. Not yet. From above, a sharp, cold voice echoed like thunder. "Stop." The battlefield froze. Every fighter looked up. There she stood, the Empress, on a hovering platform high above the arena. Her robe had changed. It shimmered like smoke. Her crown glowed. Her hands sparkled with raw energy. Her eyes, once cold and calm, now burned with rage. "You want to break chains," she shouted, "then die in them." She raised both hands. Lightning shot from her fingers. It struck the ground near Lena. Jaren threw himself over his daughter as the blast hit. Dust flew. The crowd screamed. Jaren stood again, coughing, eyes narrowed. He set Lena down gently behind a broken stone wall. "Don't come out, no matter what happens." She grabbed his hand. "Please don't go." "I have to," he said softly. "She won't stop until I stop her." He turned and walked toward the royal platform. "Come down," he shouted. "Face me." The Empress laughed. "You are nothing. Just a dirty human with glowing eyes." Jaren looked up. "I'm not just a human," he said. "I'm a father. That's something you'll never understand." Suddenly, the Empress leaped from her platform. She landed with unnatural grace, floating down to face him in the center of the arena. The crowd stepped back. No guards. No help, just the two of them. The final battle began. She struck first, throwing a wave of dark energy toward him. He rolled to the side and charged. She summoned a blade made of pure light. Jaren picked up a fallen sword, still glowing from his fire. Their blades clashed. Sparks flew. Jaren felt every strike in his bones. The Empress was fast, faster than anything he had faced. Her movements were sharp, cruel, deadly. But Jaren had something else. Purpose. Every time she knocked him down, he got back up. Every time she laughed, he fought harder. He remembered Lena's voice, Ray's courage, Breck's wisdom, the slaves behind him, counting on him. He wasn't fighting just for his daughter anymore. He was fighting for everyone. The Empress screamed, "You dare defy a goddess? You're no goddess," Jaron growled. "You're a coward in a crown." He dodged a final strike, spun, and drove his blade into the glowing crystal at her chest, the source of her power. She gasped. Her crown cracked. Her body shimmered, sparks flying from her arms. "No, no," she cried. "I cannot fall to a human." But it was too late. The fire inside Jaron burned brighter now, stronger than fear, stronger than pain. He whispered one last word. "Burn." The Empress exploded in a wave of light. And then she was gone. Silence fell over the arena. Then, slowly, cheering. Hands raised. Voices lifted. The Empress was dead. The slaves were free. And the flame had won. Jaron dropped to one knee, exhausted. Lena ran into his arms. "You did it," she cried. "You saved me." He held her tight. "I told you I would. I never break my promise." Ray and Breck walked up, smiling through tears. "The palace is ours now," Ray said. "The guards have surrendered. The Empire has fallen." Jaron stood, holding Lena's hand. "No," he said. "Not fallen. Changed." Days passed. Then weeks. The alien city began to heal. The walls were cleaned of blood. The cages were melted down. The slaves were no longer slaves. They were citizens. Jaron refused the crown. "I didn't fight to rule," he said. "I fought to free." Instead, he helped form a new council, one with humans, aliens, miners, builders, teachers. Everyone had a voice now. The arena? It was turned into a school, where stories were shared. And children, alien and human, learned together. One morning, Jaron stood on a balcony with Lena in his arms. She looked up at the sun. "It's warm again." He smiled. "That's what happens when you break the darkness." Lena snuggled into his chest. "You're still the flame." He laughed softly. "No, little one. I was never the flame." She blinked. "Then what were you?" He kissed her forehead. "Just a father." Far beyond the city, in deep space, whispers began to spread. Of a human man who burned through the Empress's lies. Of a little girl who gave him strength. Of a fire that rose from love, not hate. And in many corners of the galaxy, where chains still held the innocent, a name was spoken with hope. Jaron.